Chapter 11 of Management, an Integrated Approach. Organizational Change. Part 2. Discussion questions to think about while reading this chapter. Question number 1 on the different approaches to organizational change. Consider the various approaches to organizational change. What are the advantages and disadvantages of each approach? Under what conditions is one approach more suitable than another? Question number 2 on changing employees' attitudes. Why is creating dissatisfaction with the status quo so difficult? In what ways can a manager create dissatisfaction? Question number 3 on how to follow through with change. How is change derailed in organizations? What can managers do to prevent the failure of change processes? The role of the external environment in driving change. Organizations now compete in an increasing number of countries against a dizzying array of global and local competitors. At the same time, they must confront a variety of local government regulations that may be constantly changing in their different markets. Customer demands vary dramatically across markets, and also change more quickly. Jean Fang of Fang Brothers Holdings, a textile company, noted that consumers in China have an insatiable appetite for certain lifestyle products, but that they lose their interest quickly. Companies that remain successful in China must constantly reinvent themselves to ensure that they stay relevant. Technological advances escalate these changes. For instance, the amount of new technical information doubles every 2 years, and it is predicted to double every 72 hours in the future. New entrants in the marketplace, substitute products, increased competitive intensity, and growing bargaining power of customers and suppliers all have a dramatic influence on the competitive landscape. As these forces evolve, they necessitate that organizations transform the way they conduct business. Among the many drivers of change, 2 of the most prominent are globalization and technological innovation. Globalization. In the last several decades, we have seen a decline of trade barriers and concomitant increase in the extent of cross-border trade. For businesses, this has meant unprecedented opportunities to both buy from overseas suppliers and to sell their goods and services in those markets. Not only are companies venturing far from their home markets, but they are also facing foreign rivals coming into their home markets. Operating in a diverse array of markets has meant that organizations can no longer rely upon a few variations of their offerings that are then sold around the world. Instead, they have to tailor their products and services to local preferences. A washing machine that is desirable in the United States may not be desirable in India. The features, price points, and look and feel all may differ in different markets. Customization can prove to be difficult for many of these companies because they are, at the same time, seeking economies of scale, which is easiest when a company produces a small number of variants of a product in very large quantities. George Bauer, CEO of BMW, has stated, "Products have to be local with a global brand. I see us as a globally integrated organization with a local presence and localized products." One way in which organizations meet this demand is to build foundational products that can be produced efficiently and can be easily reconfigured to fit local preferences. Globalization has also changed the dynamics of the workforce in many organizations. Organizations that employ local leadership or engage in partnerships can gain a competitive advantage through their extensive knowledge of the local culture, political environment, and available resources. At the same time that they retain local leadership, those multinationals also have to find the right balance of control and autonomy for those local managers to respond quickly to shifts in their local market. A venture capitalist doing business in China noted, "Multinational corporations have good products and services, but their disadvantage is they are not flexible. Their decision-making procedures are long. In certain industries where the competitive landscape can change every few months, Chinese entrepreneurs can make decisions very fast, and that gives them an advantage." Technology. The ability to communicate and send massive amounts of data around the world has allowed globalization to move from something that affects countries and corporations to something that affects individuals in more significant ways than first imagined. Companies can reach for customers, resources, and talent from all over the world. They can reach into people's lives through the internet and mobile phones, as well as through newspapers, radio, television, and movies. Indeed, technology has allowed for more than adaptation, it has driven complete transformations. Technology may well be the greatest driver for change in today's new competitive landscape, having become a strategic part of most businesses. enabling the redefinition of markets and industries and the strategies and designs of firms competing within them. In the bestseller, The World is Flat, Thomas Friedman points to three major technological changes that drastically affected the world's competitive environment. Change 1, the massive installation of undersea fiber optic cable and bandwidth that have made it possible to globally transmit and store huge amounts of data for almost nothing. Change 2, the diffusion of PCs around the world. Change 3, the convergence of a variety of software applications from email, to Google, to Microsoft Office, to specially designed outsourcing programs that, when combined with all those PCs and bandwidth, made it possible to create global work flow platforms. Technology has influenced almost every aspect of business. Inventory systems, manufacturing processes, human resource systems, and financial controls were redesigned using technology that could drastically improve productivity, predictability, speed, and accuracy. For example, Walmart's ability to adapt technology sooner and integrate new technological systems more effectively than its competitors greatly added to the company's growth and competitive prowess. The company introduced electronic scanning of uniform product codes at the point of sale years ahead of most of its competitors, 2 years ahead of Kmart. In addition, Walmart was one of the first retail stores to launch its own satellite system, which allowed sales data to be gathered and analyzed continuously and in real time. Later, this system proved crucial as Walmart continued to adapt its processes and systems, using it for everything from credit card authorizations to inventory control to automated distribution. Nintendo was a victim and later a beneficiary of technological innovation. The company dominated the video gaming industry in the early 1990s with a 60% market share. Yet in the early years of the new millennium, it lost 2/3 of its market share. New technology and the infiltration of higher-end gaming consoles pushed Nintendo out of the market lead. In 2005, Nintendo transformed its organization through a $220 million investment in R&D and a realignment of its operating strategy. Nintendo used the internet and networking technology to create an online community called Sages, which offered the company advice on new products and design features. These sages were given exclusive rewards, for example, previews of new games, in exchange for helping users and providing community support. By interfacing with its core customers through its online environment, Nintendo deepened loyalty, learned more about the market, and gained crucial ideas it could leverage to obtain the most from its capital commitment to R&D. In recent years, we have seen the results of that investment with the very successful introduction of the Wii. The need for constant innovation affects organizations in other ways as well. For example, product life cycles can no longer take years to complete. In fact, by introducing new models or variations on existing models, companies often move so quickly that they can cannibalize their own products. Short cycles offer less opportunity to recuperate major expenditures in R&D and product marketing efforts. As such, organizations must adapt and find ways to keep pace with the changes and yet manage their business effectively. Such parameters have led organizations to consider partnering on innovation to share some of the costs. Some companies are even looking outside their employee base to drive innovation. One approach that has become popular is open source innovation, a process where companies invite the community to help solve certain challenges. Linux, OpenIDEA, and Wikipedia have built their businesses by developing a collaborative community, where individuals from all over the world contribute ideas, solutions, and new challenges. By using open source innovation, many companies have been able to tap into technical resources that would be impossible to hire on their own. Open source innovation is one form of crowdsourcing, where a company sources new ideas and contributions from a community that is far larger than their employee base. Crowdsourcing is not confined to technology companies. Threadless, a Chicago-based fashion company, has used crowdsourcing as the basis of their design business. The company began by inviting designers from anywhere to submit t-shirt designs on the Threadless website. The design submissions, usually 100 per week, are reviewed by an internal Threadless team, and the top 10 designs are showcased on the Threadless website for 1 week. The designs that generate the greatest number of votes from the broader Threadless community, including its customers, fans, and other designers, are offered for sale. The winning designer receives a small payment as financial incentive, as well as recognition from the design community. In essence, Threadless has outsourced both its design and production planning to the broader community. They rely on the Threadless community to both supply the idea for the product as well as buy the product. Using this approach, Threadless has been able to cost-effectively manage their business, innovate with new designs, and give customers what they want. As we discussed in Chapter 7, those few organizations that are successful for long periods of time are able to champion innovation and experimentation while simultaneously reinforcing efficiency and cost-effectiveness in traditional business lines. They are able to anticipate and/or react to the demands of the changing external environment while preserving the aspects of internal operations that have enabled them to achieve success in the past. To accomplish this dual task, organizations sometimes need to drive change in their internal environments. Their biggest challenge is not in the marketplace and lies instead within their own organizations. They need to mobilize their own people to embrace change, and, in turn, adapt their organization to allow those changes to thrive. Agility is the mantra for survival and success, but it only comes to fruition in an organization that embraces change. The role of the internal environment in navigating change. External change drivers such as globalization and technological innovation can impact the competitive landscape so dramatically that it is easy to overlook the role of the internal environment. Organizations often resist change. This resistance is referred to as inertia, or the inability of organizations to change as rapidly as the environment. This implies that the greater the inertia, the greater the distance between the environment and organizational practices. Sometimes organizations only wake up to change when they begin to perform poorly. Necessity is indeed sometimes the precursor to change. As stated earlier, misalignment between an organization and its strategy often drives the need for change. The strategy may have adjusted to the market context, but to actually implement it, the company may need to make organizational adjustments. The balance scorecard discussed in Chapter 10 can be a useful tool for understanding some of the performance gaps that arise from such implementation failures. When organizations are faced with dysfunctional internal processes, or when internal operations no longer keep pace with competitive pressures, the need for change is heightened. Internal changes may include restructuring the organization, the development of training programs, or the need to add resources with particular skill sets. Over the last few years, Google has taken over Microsoft's once unassailable perch atop the computer internet world. Google's rise to power illustrates an important key to internally motivated change. While firms often have limited control over the external environment, they can greatly affect their internal environment. This, in turn, allows them to respond to and even shape their external conditions. Some observers argue that much of Google's success has come through a relentless commitment to fostering innovation and organizing its business around the idea of developing internal agility. As discussed in Chapter 8, successes such as Gmail and Google Maps started as innovation communities rather than through a top-down investment in R&D. These innovations have the power to change Google's direction by creating new lines of business. Innovation requires more than technology and open structures, of course. Developing and managing the individuals who form the Google family is a top priority. As such, hiring and onboarding at Google remain critical to its success. New employees must go through a rigorous interview schedule, meeting with potential teammates, managers, and executives. They are vetted in these interviews to see if they have the skill, drive, and attitude to thrive in Google's innovative environment. This practice has proven critical as Google maintains its culture by hiring individuals who can effect change in the organization. In other words, Google prepares the organization for change by hiring people who are always looking for change and have the ability to adjust when necessary. Through its efforts, Google has created a culture that celebrates change and pushes contributors to innovate. Google thrives by asking employees to take risks, to follow their passions, and to not be afraid of failure. As organizations grow, adapt, and even transform, different drivers intensify at different times. Sometimes change initiatives are focused on cost-cutting or process improvement. In other situations, the nature of the change initiative is more culturally focused. The objective of the change process often dictates the most appropriate approach. Key aspects of organizational change. Understanding the need for change and where it originates is only part of the equation. The more difficult aspect of the change process is often the way in which it is channeled in an organization. Companies often need to find the right balance between reactive and proactive change. between planned and organic change, and between incremental and transformative change. Balancing these approaches is a key role of leadership in an organization. Triggers of change: reactive versus proactive. Organizations receive constant feedback from both inside and outside the organization. When those signals portend a growing misalignment, the best organizations act quickly to analyze the nature of the phenomena, design the most effective changes to be made, and then execute them. Reactive change is a process where change is initiated in response to some known external threat or opportunity. For instance, when oil prices drop, oil companies often react by changing their activities, focusing less on exploration and more on cost management. Reactive change programs are generally rolled out from the top down. Leaders tend to notice lagging performance indicators first and then seek to identify the problem. Once they diagnose the problem, they analyze the issue and seek to find its underlying causes. Often the initial problem turns out to be a symptom of greater, more fundamental issues. Once leaders understand the full scope of the problem, the next phase requires them to design different options for closing the gap or solving the problem. Typically, the plan includes not only the steps to be taken but also the identification of individuals who will be accountable for each of them. Deadlines and checkpoints are also created and agreed upon. Of course, the capacity to react effectively to environmental shifts is crucial, yet the greater ability, in terms of leverage for higher levels of performance, comes through the capacity to engage proactively with change. Proactive change has the potential to thrust an organization forward in the marketplace, thus creating the opportunity for greater competitive success. Proactive change is a process in which change is initiated based on some anticipatory event or opportunity on the horizon. Where the nature of reactive change forces organizations to focus almost exclusively on closing some strategic or performance gap, proactive change encourages the search for new opportunities. Proactive change leaders often engage in envisioning new possibilities for an organization. This envisioning leads to designing what should be, rather than simply focusing on what is. The exploration of what should be leads to implementing a plan to create what will be. This collectively held image is used by individuals and teams to find ways to proactively move an organization in that direction. One of the final initiatives that Jack Welch championed before stepping down as CEO at GE personifies proactive change. Looking to leave the organization moving into the future even more strongly than before, he launched a program called DestroyYourBusiness.com. When speaking of his reasoning, he succinctly stated, "Change means opportunity. And this is a greatest opportunity yet." In doing so, he wanted to force managers to look beyond the current state of the company to a future desired state. He also wanted them to identify changes or competitors on the horizon that could supplant their role in their respective industries. Origination of change, planned versus organic. When we think of change, we most often think of planned change interventions where organizational leaders plan to affect a few or all of the following organizational structures, processes, and culture, as well as the behaviors, beliefs, and emotions of their employees. Planned change is a process where change efforts are predetermined and driven from the top down. Organizations often initiate this type of change through a planned program, based on a scan of the competitive horizon, an analysis of their control cycle, or through a strength, weakness, opportunity, threat, SWOT analysis. As we discussed in Chapter 4, many organizations employ strategic planning functions to help ensure that they remain competitive and relevant in the marketplace. Organizations engage in planned change to create a better fit between the organization's capabilities and its current environmental demands, or promote changes that help the organization to better fit predicted future environments. Although planned change surfaces from organizational leaders who perceive gaps in alignment or potential future opportunities, and then design and implement distinct change initiatives in a top-down approach, organic change emerges from lower in the organization from individuals or teams as they innovate, solve problems, seek more effective ways to accomplish their work, react to large environmental shifts, or interact with others in cross-functional positions. Note that change in an organization can be both top-down and also organic at the same time. Organic change gains its distinctive quality from the precept that continuous adjustments can accumulate and create substantial change. Often organic change begins through employee empowerment in areas that place value on having problems solved. At the level of those who do the work, individuals as well as managers are trusted and asked to identify opportunities for improvement. When the answers or best practices do emerge, a manager can institute changes and share them across the organization where necessary. Organic change can be slow, but it also can lead to increased organizational buy-in. The empowering nature of organic change offers space for unleashing the creative drives in individuals and teams. Organic change is about harnessing the collective genius of teams and individuals and using it to make a difference for an organization. Unfortunately, in authoritative top-down organizations, organic change is difficult if not impossible to initiate. Even in organizations that are more open, the uncertainty inherent in organic change can generate unease. Magnitude of change, incremental versus transformative. Another facet of change to consider is the magnitude of change. During stable times, most organizations engage in incremental change, a process in which small improvements or changes are made to processes and approaches on an ongoing basis. Incremental change is often part of a planned process and could include improvements in the quality of operations, supply chain processes, or product or service features. In many organizations, incremental changes are focused on what are called sustainable technologies, which are designed to improve the performance of established products, along the dimensions of performance that mainstream customers in major markets have historically valued. While improvements in sustainable technologies are important, success on this dimension can lead to complacency and prevent new ideas or approaches from filtering into the company. These new ideas can sometimes take the form of disruptive technologies, which usually include a different set of attributes than those valued by mainstream customers. These attributes generally appear to satisfy only a small subset of the market, and often do not initially appear to be very compelling or valuable. Leaders who focus solely on sustainable technologies may hurt their organizations in the long term. Focusing solely on sustainable technologies drives managers to make resource allocation decisions based on their current customers and ignore future potential markets. Xerox's failure to capitalize on the small tabletop photocopier market is a case in point. Xerox had so dominated the photocopier industry with large copy centers that its name became synonymous with copying. The company's management and sales practices were considered the best in the industry, yet when the idea of developing small tabletop photocopiers emerged, Xerox did nothing. When the small copiers appeared on the market, the demand was so low that Xerox continued building the large copiers it believed its best customers wanted. For the most part, these customers did not want the smaller copiers, but a much larger customer base was on the horizon. By not going after the small copier market, Xerox missed out on a massive profit opportunity. Ultimately, their joint venture with Fuji, which was focused on the Japanese market and most vulnerable to this gap in their product line, found a solution. A small team collaborated to build a new smaller product themselves, without the permission of the parent company. This unanticipated innovation allowed Xerox to shore up their position in the small copier market. When organizations perceive disruptive technologies in the marketplace or ones that will create entirely new markets, they must react, adapt, and even transform to keep or increase market share and profitability. With enough foresight, they may be able to engage in proactive changes and prepare themselves to lead in disruptive arenas. As we mentioned in the introduction, Kodak is one firm that failed to innovate in its industry even after it saw the changes coming. Kodak's fall from grace came with the rise of digital technology, a disruptive innovation that kept eating away at the photographic film market. From 1996 to 2007, digital imaging hollowed out Kodak's core film business. The irony is that Kodak had invested in digital cameras as early as 1970, yet Kodak's problem was typical of sustainable technology thinking. Many individuals in the company did not want to take the company in the digital direction because they felt threatened by the new technology and were concerned about cannibalizing their core film business. Ever since Kodak began to lose market share in the early 1990s, it searched for a way to get back to its market leader position. The company changed structures, fired thousands of employees, brought in new management, and invested in massive retraining programs. In spite of all its efforts, success was unattainable. A similar story unfolded at Polaroid that clung to its instant picture film model right until the company shut down. Many organizations face significant inflection points in their history, sometimes called frame-breaking changes. These inflections can be triggered by disruptive technologies, new competitive threats, shifts in internal dynamics, including the loss of key resources, new government regulations, or other factors. The airline industry in the United States experienced such a frame-breaking jolt when it was deregulated in 1978. Deregulation changed all of the industry's rules. Before deregulation, the Civil Aviation Board dictated airfares, routes, new airlines, and many other aspects of air travel. After deregulation, competition intensified as new airlines entered the industry and fares were sharply cut. The entire economics of doing business changed, which called for transformative change, a process where change is radical or disruptive, typically in response to a major competitive threat and/or significant change in a firm's external or internal environment. Transformational change often accompanies dramatic shifts not only in processes, systems, and people but also in strategy and mission. The changes are so drastic that creating alignment requires breaking the old paradigms and introducing completely new ones. Needless to say, while incremental change is welcomed by most individuals in an organization, transformational change faces much greater resistance. We will address ways to confront resistance to change later in this chapter. The change process. Change is not an easy process for many organizations. While some in a company may see a need for change, many others will be satisfied with the status quo, fearing that any change may lessen their credibility or status in the organization. One universal truth that everyone will agree upon: no matter how good of an idea you may have for any change, you will always encounter resistance to it. Leaders who seek to lead change often can't simply announce a plan and hope it will stick. Making change a reality requires concerted effort and a methodical approach to overcome resistance that could derail the initiative. For starters, leaders must make the case for change by creating dissatisfaction with the status quo and presenting a new model for the organization that is realistic, compelling, and appealing. In addition, for change to be successful, leaders need to lessen employees' fears about and resistance to the change process. The major components of the change process can be summarized in a simple formula: D times M times P is greater than RC plus CC, where D is dissatisfaction with the status quo, M is a new model for the organization, and P is the process for change. The combination of these forces for change must be greater than the resistance to change, R, and cost of change, CC, that employees experience, creating dissatisfaction. In this formula, dissatisfaction, D, provides the energy necessary for breaking organizational inertia and helps create the motivation for change. Creating dissatisfaction with the status quo helps to free people and organizations from complacency. In a crisis situation, dissatisfaction is generally high and many employees understand the need for change. In this case, the leader doesn't have to do much. The real challenge comes when leaders see potential forces for change on the horizon that are not impacting the firm's performance today but could be major influences in the future. How does a leader create a case for change in this situation? How does he or she jolt an organization out of complacency? How does he or she create a sense of dissatisfaction with the status quo within their organization? Some researchers have likened the creating of dissatisfaction to unfreezing an organization. Unfreezing can be very difficult because most people gravitate toward patterned behavior, especially when they have been successful in the past. One way to build dissatisfaction is to appeal to the rational instincts among employees and show them a quantitative assessment of the need for change. This can be done by disseminating a benchmarking or internal and external performance opportunity gap analysis that clearly shows the challenges ahead for their firm. As we discussed in Chapter 10, with benchmarking, organizations compare their performance to that of other companies in the same or different industries that are best in class. This can sometimes showcase a looming gap with key competitors on important dimensions and can serve as a motivation for change. Other external triggers can be identified by scanning the competitive horizon, looking for ways in which the context is likely to change, and benchmarking an organization's ability to meet the new contextual realities. Employee attitude surveys are a means to better understand employee concerns and issues, and the results of those surveys can also provide the foundation for a change process. To ensure traction, organizational dissatisfaction must extend beyond a few scattered individuals to include influential leaders. It is particularly important to identify those who are essential to the change process and to solicit their support. Without the support of key individuals, change can be easily derailed or minimized. Developing a new model for the future. Once dissatisfaction has been aroused, it needs to be channeled. One way that leaders channel dissatisfaction is through the development and communication of a compelling model, or vision for change. The model should present a portrait of what is being changed and why. It should present a description of a future end state, where an organization wants to go and what it needs to do to get there. A compelling model offers employees hope and a higher sense of meaning as they band together to achieve the desired goal. Effective models are desirable, feasible, and relevant. Change often requires organizations to stretch in significant ways, but the desired change should not be so radical that employees can easily discount it. If the model appears to be beyond the realm of possibility, it can be easily resisted in an organization. The model also should fit with the expected contextual landscape in which the company will work. In communicating the model for change, leaders need to appeal to both logic and emotions. They must present a compelling case for change based on benchmarking or other assessments. In addition, leaders need to tap into an emotional connection with employees. They often do so by demonstrating passion and excitement for the desired change. This passion can become contagious if leaders understand and respond to employees' concerns and issues. As we will see, change can be easily resisted if employees do not feel a sense of emotional engagement in the process. The implementation process, dissatisfaction with the current situation, and a model for a high-performing future state will come to nothing if people do not know how to get there. The most important next step is to develop an effective process for implementing change. An effective process, P, includes a detailed implementation plan, a communication process, and a mechanism for measuring progress. This often includes a combination of kickoff events or meetings coupled with training sessions focused on implementing the desired changes in the organization. The process serves as the map to building organizational change. Many organizational leaders fail to create lasting changes by mistakenly seeing organizational change as an event rather than a process. After years of studying the difference between organizations that create real change and those that generate only fleeting progress, John P. Cotter developed an 8-step process that outlines many of the keys to success. The first few steps of his process are aligned with creating dissatisfaction with the status quo and crafting a model for a better future. Cotter found that most significant changes occur in sequence as follows. Step 1. Establish a sense of urgency. Change leaders must build enough momentum to overcome any inherent organizational or individual inertia. This is part of the process of raising dissatisfaction in an organization and galvanizing people into action. Step 2. Form a powerful guiding coalition. Once a sense of urgency is heightened, it is important to build a team or coalition of support. This must include individuals who have both the authority and responsibility for ensuring that change can be successfully cultivated. The support of the senior management team is particularly important if the change process is being championed by lower-level employees in the organization. Step 3. Develop a vision. The vision includes the model of the desired future state of an organization. This vision must move beyond numbers to give direction and impetus for the organization to move. Step 4. Communicate the new vision. Communication is vital to ensuring buy-in throughout an organization. A vision can provide a source of motivation and excitement for employees. As mentioned previously, communication must speak to both the mind and heart of employees. That is, employees must logically understand the case for change as well as have the passion to engage in the change process. Step 5. Empower others to act on the vision. After creating and sharing the vision, the guiding coalition must work to empower an organization to act. The communication plan should reinforce empowerment, but the coalition also must remove the organizational structure, systems, and process obstacles. Step 6. Plan for and create short-term wins. The change implementation process can be a long one. To sustain momentum and excitement, it is important to set short-term goals and, when you achieve them, to celebrate. Otherwise, having only a long-term plan plays into the hands of cynics who can easily tout the lack of progress. Step 7. Consolidate improvements and produce more changes. While the initial push to move a change program forward is often the most difficult, the program can fail at other crucial junctures. One of these occurs after some initial momentum, when the tendency is to think we have arrived. Reinvigorating the change process requires constant vigilance and the full involvement of organizational leaders, especially in the heat of pushing the wheel forward or, if the wheel has begun to move forward, when people want to stop pushing to rest their arms. Step 8. Institutionalize changes in the culture. The new processes, systems, and values have to become institutionalized for success to be sustained. This institutionalization requires management to share how the new system has accomplished its goal, to explain how performance has improved because of it, and to instill those norms and values into the next generation of leaders. Freezing the changes in place is often overlooked. As any personal coach or person who has tried and failed at dieting will explain, embedding the new behaviors into common practice is difficult. Many individuals will fall back into old patterns once the anxiety is no longer strong enough to move the system toward change. Refreezing makes change sustainable. To refreeze organizational change requires paying attention to the environment. Structures, systems, and culture have to be aligned to the desired change. In leading change, it is also important to think about timing and pace. In situations where there is high dissatisfaction, a heightened sense of urgency, and a large base of support, change can be implemented in a more top-down, directive fashion. This is particularly true for organizations facing a deep crisis. Under this pressure, bold strokes may be the best initial implementation plan. In situations where the change process is complex, the outcomes benefits of change are not immediately clear, and there is a need to galvanize followers, a slower, more collaborative approach may be appropriate. Leaders need to assess the situation that is driving change and engage in the right type of leadership approach. The ultimate goal or objective of the change process also impacts the nature of the implementation. When the goal is strictly focused on improving shareholder value or cash flow, a more directive, authoritarian approach is often utilized. When the goal is broader cultural change, a more participatory and collaborative process is typically adopted. Effective and sustainable change actually requires a combination of both approaches. In many cases, leaders need to make some quick, bold moves to improve financial performance or overall competitiveness. Sustainability and long-term success, though, hinge on an engaged and enthusiastic employee base, which requires leaders to be less dictatorial and more participatory. As such, successful change leaders need to find the right balance between these approaches. Together, the first three variables in the change equation, dissatisfaction, model, and process, form the driving forces, while the cost of change and resistance to change represent the restraining forces. The equation is a good representation of what happens in change environments, and it has been observed that, without one of these variables, change initiatives often fail. Therefore, all three variables are necessary to ensure success. Let us now briefly turn to the other side of the equation and look at the derailers of change, so we can properly anticipate and tackle them. Discussion question 3 on how to follow through with change. How is change derailed in organizations? What can managers do to prevent the failure of change processes? Costs of and resistance to change. If there is one critical fact to understand about organizational change, it is that change is difficult to implement, and even more difficult to sustain. Multiple articles, books, conferences, and educational programs are created every year to help executives implement change, yet more change programs fail than succeed every year. Even a cursory glance through the Wall Street Journal or the Harvard Business Review highlights that implementation of organizational change programs has a poor record of success. One study found that of 100 companies that attempted to make fundamental changes in the way they did business, only a few were very successful. Another study noted that 70% of all change initiatives fail. Complacency does not simply unravel organizational transformation efforts, it can also prevent the momentum from ever beginning. Complacency comes from the natural predilection of people to resist change and seek out what they are familiar with. This opposition often grows exponentially when pulled into larger communities. Storytelling, group rationalization, and shared experiences of failed organizational alignment to the new direction can spread and deepen complacency and greatly hinder efforts to transform the old organization. In some organizations where many past change efforts have failed, there is broad cynicism about any new change. The general belief is that these new ideas come and go, and the best approach is to duck for cover and hope the new change will go away like the ones before. The excitement, model, and process for change must be greater than the cost of and resistance to change. Resistance to change originates at an individual level, and then amplifies when you aggregate groups of people who are all hesitant about change. At an individual level, the costs may be social, psychological, emotional, political, or financial. Most of us don't like change once we are comfortable with a certain way of doing things. Change often requires a re-evaluation of roles, priorities, and processes. As part of the change process, employees could lose their positions, sense of identity, or friends. Employees may also need to learn new competencies, build new relationships, and invest significant time and energy in reinventing themselves. This can be a scary process. As such, people may legitimately fear a loss of influence or status in an organization. Everything they had previously worked toward may now be irrelevant. Gripped by fear or uncertainty, employees can resist change by either overtly refusing to engage in the process or through passive-aggressive actions acting as if they support the process, but doing nothing to move it forward. As one researcher noted, all employees possess a silent veto power that they can exercise at any time if they disagree with a change initiative. This type of veto power is very difficult to overrule. Employees may also resist change if they believe the change is not right for the organization, or if they do not understand the reasons behind the change process. In these situations, leaders need to do even more to communicate the reasons for change, and to build trust throughout the organization. Combating resistance to change. One way to better understand resistance to change is to assess an organization's resources, processes, and values. An organization's resources can dramatically affect the difficulty of engaging the organization in change. Resources include people, equipment, and capital, but they also include intellectual property, brand identity, R&D designs, and relationships with customers, distributors, and suppliers. Organizations that have access to abundant high-quality resources face a double-edged sword. At one level, they are in a better position to successfully confront resistance to change, but at another level, the abundance of resources means greater attachment to the status quo and a lack of urgency in the organization. Organizations with poor brand images, lack of cash, or people without the necessary skills to drive change can have lots of urgency within the organization, but simply lack the resources to drive change efforts. While resistance to change ultimately resides within individuals, it is exacerbated by organizational systems. Over time, organizations develop formal processes, such as workforce planning, and informal processes, such as those that determine how decisions are made to allocate resources. The very nature of these processes invites employees to act the same way every time. Their sameness brings greater speed and efficiency, yet these routines and systems become ingrained in the organizational practices, and can produce a massive amount of resistance when organizations begin a transformation initiative.